I was a NASA contractor until a probe sent back images that were never released. Before I say anything else, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to convince you. I'm not here to argue with anyone in the comments or prove that what I'm about to tell you is real. Honestly, I don't care if you believe me. I've spent the last 8 years caring way too much about what people might think, and all it did was keep me quiet. Silence has a weight to it. Most people don't realize that until they've carried something they can't talk about. It sits in your chest like a stone, and every year, that stone gets a little heavier. I'm 43 years old now. I'm tired, and I've decided that the risk of speaking is finally lighter than the weight of staying silent. So here I am. Take it or leave it. Let me tell you who I'm not, because that matters more than who I am. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an astronaut. I'm not some whistleblower with classified documents hidden in a storage locker somewhere. I never worked in a top-secret underground facility. I never had conversations with generals or sat in briefings with people whose names you'd recognize. I was nobody. I mean that literally. I was the kind of person who exists in the background of important work, making sure the gears keep turning while the real players do the jobs that matter. If you've ever seen a movie about NASA, I'm not the guy giving the speech. I'm the guy in the back row, staring at a monitor, making sure the numbers look right. I was a contractor, a data technician. For 6 years, I worked at a facility connected to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. My job was to manage data pipelines for deep space missions. That's a fancy way of saying I made sure information traveling from spacecraft millions of miles away actually arrived at our servers without getting corrupted along the way. It's not glamorous. It's not exciting. It's the kind of work that only gets noticed when something goes wrong, and my job was to make sure nothing ever went wrong. I was good at it. Not because I was brilliant, but because I was careful. I followed procedures. I trusted the systems. I didn't ask questions above my clearance. I didn't grow up dreaming about space. Some people did, I know. They watched the shuttle launches as kids and knew right then they wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. That wasn't me. I grew up in Ohio, in a small town outside Columbus. My dad was a machinist. My mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We were the kind of family that worried about the heating bill in January and prayed the car would pass inspection one more year. When I went to college, I picked engineering because it was practical. When I got a job with a NASA contractor, I took it because the benefits were good and the work was steady. That's it. No childhood dreams, just pragmatism. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand the kind of person I was before everything changed. I was not someone who believed in UFOs. I was not someone who thought the government was hiding aliens in a bunker somewhere. I thought people who believed that stuff were, at best, a little naive, and at worst, genuinely unwell. The universe, as I understood it, was governed by physics. Cold, empty, indifferent physics. There was no grand mystery out there. There was just matter and energy, following rules we mostly understood in a cosmos so vast that the distances alone made the idea of contact absurd. I was comfortable with that. It made sense. It let me sleep at night. I had never seen a UFO, never had a weird experience I couldn't explain, never felt watched by something I couldn't see. My life, up until the night I'm going to tell you about, was completely ordinary. I went to work. I came home. I watched TV. I argued with my wife about things that seemed important at the time and seem incredibly stupid now. I visited my parents on holidays and called my brother on his birthday. I paid my taxes. I changed the oil in my car every 5,000 miles. I was boring, dependably, almost aggressively boring. And I was fine with that. Boring felt safe. The mission I was assigned to didn't have a public name that would mean anything to you. It was one of dozens of long-duration deep space probes that NASA has sent out over the decades, most of which the general public never hears about unless something dramatic happens. This one had been operational for over 12 years when I joined the team handling its data stream. It was studying gravitational anomalies in the outer solar system. which is the kind of phrase that sounds impressive until you realize it mostly means collecting readings that physicists argue about in journals nobody reads. The probe sent back data constantly, and most of it was exactly what you'd expect: radiation levels, trajectory corrections, thermal fluctuations, images of empty space. I was part of a small team that handled one specific data stream: high-resolution images from the probe's secondary optical array. That sounds more interesting than it was. The images were almost always the same thing: star fields, blackness, occasionally a distant ice body that looked like a smudge on the screen. We'd verify the data, run it through processing protocols, and pass it up the chain to people who actually knew what to do with it. In 6 years, I never saw anything in those images that surprised me. Not once. The universe, as seen through that camera, was exactly as empty and indifferent as I had always believed it to be. There's a rhythm to that kind of work, a comfort in it. Every day, you know exactly what to expect. The data comes in. You check the data goes out. No surprises, no questions, just clean, predictable process. I like that. My marriage was falling apart at the time, slowly and then all at once, and the office was quieter than my apartment. Easier. At work. There were no arguments, no accusations, no long silences that felt heavier than shouting. There was just the hum of the servers and the glow of the monitors and the simple satisfaction of numbers moving from one place to another without error. It wasn't happiness, exactly, but it was peace. I need to tell you something before I go any further. In 6 years on that job, I had never once seen a data batch flagged for removal before it reached my station. That's not how the process worked. Data came in, data got verified, data moved up the chain. There were filters, sure, protocols for handling corrupted files or sensor errors, but those happened after verification, not before. The idea that someone would pull data out of the pipeline before people like me even got a chance to look at it, that wasn't supposed to happen. It would mean someone higher up was watching the feed in real time. It would mean someone didn't want certain things to be seen. In 6 years, I never saw that happen. Not once. I was the last person who should have seen what I saw. I want you to understand that. I wasn't special. I wasn't chosen. I wasn't even particularly curious. I was just a tired man working late on a Thursday night because his wife had asked for a separation and his apartment felt like a tomb. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, looking at the wrong screen when something went wrong with the system. A glitch, a synchronization error between servers. The kind of thing that gets logged and forgotten, that nobody ever thinks about twice. But that glitch left something on my screen that wasn't supposed to be there. And because I was tired and angry and just a little bit careless, I opened it. Maybe that's why they didn't think to watch me closely enough. I was nobody. And nobodies don't ask questions. The building where I worked wasn't the kind of place you'd see in a documentary about. NASA. There were no sleek glass walls, no mission control rooms with giant screens, no American flags framed by dramatic lighting. It was a secondary data processing facility about 2 miles from JPL's main campus. Tucked between a strip mall and an auto repair shop, the architecture was aggressively forgettable. Beige stucco walls, small windows that didn't open, a parking lot that was always half empty because most of the real work happened somewhere else. If you drove past it, you wouldn't look twice. That was the point. Most of the buildings where actual work gets done look like nothing at all. They're designed to be invisible, to blend into the background, to make you forget they exist the moment you stop looking at them. Inside wasn't much better. Fluorescent lights that buzzed just loud enough to notice. Drop ceiling tiles that had started yellowing sometime during the Clinton administration. Carpet that might have been blue once, but had faded to something closer to gray. The air always smelled faintly of recycled dust and whatever cleaning solution the night crew used on the bathrooms. There were motivational posters on the walls, the kind with eagles soaring over mountains and words like excellence printed in bold letters at the bottom. Nobody looked at them. Nobody talked about them. They were just there like the carpet, like the ceiling tiles, like everything else that made the building feel less like a workplace and more like a place where time went to die quietly. Most of my work happened in the basement. That sounds more dramatic than it was. It wasn't some secret underground bunker with armed guards and retinal scanners. It was just a lower level with better climate control because the servers needed to stay cool and the building's ancient HVAC system couldn't handle the heat they generated on the main floor. You needed biometric access to get down there, a fingerprint scan at the stairwell door, but that was standard protocol for any facility handling mission data. It didn't mean we were doing anything classified. It just meant someone, somewhere, had decided that procedures applied to everything equally, even the boring stuff. Especially the boring stuff. That's how bureaucracies work. They don't distinguish between important and unimportant. They just apply rules. The basement was where the servers lived. Rows and rows of them, humming behind glass doors, blinking with little green lights that meant everything was working the way it was supposed to. The sound down there was constant. A low drone that you stopped noticing after a few weeks, but that visitors always commented on. It sounded like being inside a machine, which, in a way, we were. The servers processed data from half a dozen different missions, pulling in information from spacecraft scattered across the solar system, storing it, sorting it, passing it along to the people who actually knew what to do with it. My job was to make sure that process happened without errors. I was a quality control checkpoint, a human filter between the machines and the scientists. The probe I was assigned to had been operational for over 12 years by the time I joined the team. It didn't have a name you'd recognize. Most deep space missions don't, unless something goes wrong or they find something spectacular. This one had done neither. It was studying gravitational anomalies in the outer solar system, which meant it spent most of its time drifting through empty space, collecting data that would take years to fully analyze, sending back readings that confirmed what physicists already suspected about how gravity behaves at the edges of our solar neighborhood. Important work, technically. Revolutionary, even if you cared about the mathematics of orbital mechanics. But not the kind of thing that makes headlines. Not the kind of thing anyone outside a very small academic community would ever hear about. My team handled one specific data stream from that probe. High-resolution images from its secondary optical array. The primary array was pointed at specific targets, stars, and distant objects that the mission scientists had flagged for observation. The secondary array was more general, capturing wide-field images of whatever happened to be in the probe's vicinity as it traveled. Think of it like a dashcam for a spacecraft. It wasn't looking for anything in particular. It was just recording constantly in case something interesting happened to drift into frame. In 12 years of operation, nothing interesting ever had. The images were almost always the same. Star fields, blackness. Occasionally, a distant chunk of ice that looked like a smudge on the screen. Void after void after void. I had been doing this work for 6 years. 6 years of opening image files, running verification protocols, checking for corruption or sensor errors, and passing clean data up the chain to people who would look at it once and file it away. 6 years of the same routine, the same screens, the same hum of the servers, the same fluorescent flicker when the lights needed replacing. I knew every step of the process so well I could do it in my sleep. Sometimes I felt like I was doing it in my sleep. The work was tedious, repetitive. The kind of thing that made hours feel like days and days feel like weeks. But I didn't mind. I had come to appreciate the predictability. There was comfort in knowing exactly what to expect. My life outside that basement had stopped making sense. My wife had asked for a separation 6 months earlier, and we were still living in the same apartment, moving around each other like ghosts, having conversations that never went anywhere and silences that said too much. My father had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's that spring. He was handling it better than my mother was, but every phone call home felt heavier than the last. The world outside felt chaotic, unpredictable, full of things I couldn't control and problems I couldn't solve, but the data was clean. The data was orderly. The data followed rules. In that basement, surrounded by the hum of machines, I could pretend that the universe still made sense. It was a refuge, maybe the only one I had left. There's something you need to understand about how data processing works at facilities like ours. Information doesn't just flow freely from a spacecraft to a scientist's desk. It passes through layers of verification, filtering, sorting. Every step has a protocol. Every protocol has a purpose. Data comes in, gets logged, gets checked for errors, gets formatted, gets passed along. It's bureaucratic and slow and sometimes maddening, but it works. The system catches mistakes. The system prevents corruption. The system ensures that what reaches the end of the pipeline is clean, accurate, reliable. I trusted that system. I had spent 6 years inside it, watching it work exactly the way it was supposed to, and I had no reason to doubt it. The one thing I had never seen, in all those years, was data getting pulled from the pipeline before it reached my station. That wasn't how the process worked. My team was supposed to be one of the first checkpoints, not one of the last. If something was wrong with a file, if there was corruption or a sensor malfunction, we were supposed to catch it. That was our job. The idea that someone higher up might be watching the feed in real time, flagging certain files for removal before anyone at my level even got a chance to look at them, that wasn't part of the protocol. It wasn't supposed to happen. And in 6 years of doing this work, processing thousands of data batches from dozens of missions, I had never once seen it happen. Not once. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand how strange it was when it finally did happen. I need you to feel the weight of 6 years of routine, 6 years of predictability, 6 years of trusting the system to work exactly the way it was designed to work. I need you to understand that when I noticed the anomaly, when I saw that a batch of files had been flagged for removal before reaching my station, my first thought wasn't suspicion. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't even curiosity. My first thought was that something must be wrong with the system, a glitch, an error, because the alternative, that someone was deliberately hiding data, that someone didn't want certain images to be seen, that didn't fit the world I thought I understood. That possibility didn't even occur to me, not at first. It was a Thursday night in late October. I remember that because Halloween was the following week, and someone had taped a cardboard skeleton to the break room door upstairs. The kind of cheap decoration you buy at a drugstore for $3. I walked past it on my way to the basement that evening and thought about how strange it was that people still did things like that. Decorated for holidays, celebrated, acted like the world was normal. My world hadn't felt normal in months. My wife had asked for a separation 2 weeks earlier. We were still living in the same apartment because neither of us could afford to move out yet, but we had stopped talking. Really talking. We moved around each other like furniture. I couldn't stand being there, so I worked late, not out of dedication, out of cowardice. The office at 11 p.m. was a different place than the office at 11 a.m. Quieter, emptier. Most of the overhead lights were off, just the emergency strips glowing along the baseboards and the light from my workstation cutting through the dark. The servers still hummed, of course. They never stopped. But without the usual background noise of people, phones, conversations drifting down hallways, the hum felt louder, more present, like the building itself was breathing. I had a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and a half-eaten granola bar I kept forgetting to finish. The cleaning crew had already come and gone. I was alone, completely alone, and for the first time in weeks, that felt like a relief instead of a punishment. I was running a routine verification on an incoming data batch, the same thing I had done thousands of times before. The probe had transmitted a new set of images from its secondary optical array, and my job was to check them for corruption, log them in the system, and pass them along to the next station in the pipeline. Mindless work. The kind of thing I could do on autopilot while my brain wandered somewhere else entirely. I wasn't thinking about the data. I was thinking about my apartment, about how quiet it would be when I got home, about whether Sarah would still be awake, and whether it would be worse if she was or if she wasn't. I was thinking about anything except the numbers on my screen. That's when I noticed something unusual. A subset of the image files in the batch had been flagged, not for review, not for analysis, for immediate removal from the processing queue. The flag had been applied at a system tier above my access level, which meant someone with higher clearance had intervened in real time, watching the data stream as it came in, pulling specific files before anyone at my station could even see them. I stared at the flag for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of any protocol I knew. In 6 years, I had never seen data get pulled before it reached my checkpoint. The whole point of my job was to be one of the first sets of eyes on incoming images. If something was being removed before I could see it, that meant someone didn't want me to see it. My first instinct was to assume I was wrong. A system error, a misread. Maybe the flag meant something different than I thought it did. Maybe there was a protocol I wasn't aware of, some exception for certain types of data that had never come up before. I started running diagnostics, checking the batch log, trying to figure out what had triggered the removal command. The more I looked, the less sense it made. The flagged files weren't corrupted. They weren't tagged as sensor errors or transmission artifacts. They were clean images, properly formatted, with no technical reason to be pulled from the queue. Someone had made a deliberate decision to remove them. Someone who had access to the data stream before I did. Someone who was watching. Here's where things went wrong. Or right, depending on how you look at it. The removal command had been executed, but there was a synchronization delay between our primary server and the local workstations, a minor glitch. The kind of thing that happens sometimes when systems are talking to each other and one of them hiccups for a fraction of a second. Normally, it wouldn't matter. The delay gets logged, the systems catch up, everything proceeds as normal. But in this case, the delay meant that cached thumbnails of the flagged files had already been copied to my local workstation before the removal command propagated. They weren't supposed to be there. They would be automatically purged when the system sensed, which the log estimated would happen in 47 minutes. But for now, right now, they existed. On my screen, waiting. I sat there for a long time, staring at those thumbnails. They were small, maybe 100 pixels across, too compressed to show any real detail. Just gray smudges against black backgrounds, like every other deep space image I'd ever processed. But they were different. They were forbidden. Someone with authority I didn't have had decided that these specific images should not be seen, and here they were anyway, ghosts in the machine, artifacts of a glitch that should have been impossible. I knew I should close the window. I knew I should pretend I hadn't seen them. I knew that opening flagged files, even accidentally accessible ones, was probably a violation of protocols I had signed documents agreeing to follow. I knew all of that. I sat there anyway. I want to tell you that I made a rational decision, that I weighed the risks and benefits, considered the consequences, came to a reasoned conclusion about what to do. But that's not what happened. What happened was simpler and uglier than that. I was tired. I was angry. I was sitting alone in a basement at 11 o'clock at night because I couldn't face going home to a woman who didn't love me anymore in an apartment. That felt like a mausoleum for a marriage that had died without either of us noticing. My father was losing his mind one neuron at a time. My life had become a series of empty rooms and awkward silences and days that blurred together into nothing. And here, finally, was something different. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something that someone didn't want me to see. The cursor hovered over the first thumbnail. I could feel my pulse in my throat. This was a line. I knew it was a line. Once I crossed it, I couldn't uncross it. Whatever was in those images, whatever had been important enough for someone to flag them for removal in real time, I would know. And knowing things you're not supposed to know changes you. It makes you complicit. It makes you a participant in something larger than yourself, whether you want to be or not. I understood all of that in some abstract way. I understood that the smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that any reasonable person in my position would do was to close the window and walk away and pretend that glitch had never happened. But I wasn't feeling reasonable. I was feeling something else, something that had been building for months, maybe years. A kind of quiet rage at the way the world worked, at the systems I had trusted, at the procedures I had followed, at the life I had built so carefully only to watch it crumble into dust. I had done everything right. I had followed the rules. I had trusted the process. And where had it gotten me? Alone in a basement, processing images of empty space, while everything I cared about fell apart around me. Maybe I wanted to break something. Maybe I wanted to prove that the systems I had devoted my life to weren't as perfect as I had believed. Maybe I just wanted to feel, for once, like I had some control over something. I opened the first thumbnail. The image expanded to fill my screen, and for a moment, I didn't understand what I was looking at. My brain tried to fit it into familiar categories, tried to match it against the thousands of deep space images I had processed over the years. But it didn't fit. Nothing about it fit. The shapes were wrong. The geometry was wrong. Everything I thought I knew about what was out there, what was possible, what the universe was supposed to look like, it all collapsed in that single moment. I sat there, frozen, the glow of the monitor reflecting off my face in the dark, and I realized that I had just made the worst decision of my life. Or maybe the only real decision I had ever made. I still don't know which. I need to stop here for a moment. I've been telling this story in order, trying to make it make sense, trying to give you the context you need to understand what happened. But this next part, what I saw in those images, I don't know how to describe it. I've tried. For 8 years, I've tried. I've written it down and crossed it out. I've said it out loud to empty rooms just to hear how it sounds. And every time, the words come out wrong. They're too small. They don't fit. It's like trying to describe a color that doesn't exist, or a sound that only you can hear. The language wasn't built for this. My brain wasn't built for this. So if what I say next sounds confused or contradictory, or like I'm circling back on myself, that's why. I'm not being evasive. I'm trying to translate something that doesn't translate. The first image showed a region of space that should have been empty. I checked the probe's trajectory data 3 times, 4 times, looking for an error, looking for some explanation. There was nothing in that sector. No planets, no moons, no asteroid fields, no debris. According to every map, every calculation, every piece of information we had about that part of the solar system, the probe was traveling through void. Empty, featureless void. The kind of nothing that goes on for millions of miles without interruption. That's what should have been in the image. Blackness. Maybe some distant stars, pinpricks of light from other solar systems, but nothing close. Nothing that would register on the probe's optical array as anything more than background noise. That's what should have been there. That's not what was there. There were shapes in the darkness, structures. I don't know what else to call them. They weren't asteroids. Asteroids have irregular surfaces, cratered and pitted by impacts, rough in ways that make sense when you understand how they form. These weren't rough. They weren't irregular. They were geometric, clean lines, precise angles, surfaces that looked smooth, uniform, like they had been manufactured rather than formed by natural processes. I sat there staring at them, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were seeing, and I couldn't. It was like one of those optical illusions where you know the image has to mean something, but your perception keeps sliding off it, refusing to resolve into anything coherent. My mind kept rejecting it. This can't be real. This can't be real. The scale was wrong. That's what made it worse. The probe's telemetry included distance calculations, rough estimates of how far away objects in the frame were based on parallax, and known reference points. According to those calculations, the structures were massive, not building-sized, not city-sized, kilometers across, miles, the kind of scale that the human brain isn't equipped to process, that we can only understand abstractly as numbers on a page. I tried to imagine standing next to one of them, looking up, and I couldn't. The image collapsed in my head. It was like trying to imagine the edge of the universe or the moment before time began. My brain just refused to go there. It hit a wall and stopped. I keep reaching for analogies, and they keep failing. Like finding a cathedral at the bottom of the ocean. Like seeing a word written in a language that predates language itself. Like watching something that shouldn't exist casting a shadow in a place where there's nothing to cast shadows. None of that captures it. The structures didn't look like anything in any astronomical database I had access to. They didn't match any known phenomenon, any theoretical model. Any artist's rendering of what alien technology might look like. They weren't sleek and shiny like a spaceship in a movie. They weren't crystalline or organic or mechanical. They were something else. Something that my visual vocabulary had no category for. Something that just sat there in the darkness, existing impossibly, not caring whether I could understand it or not. I opened the other images. There were 4 more, captured in sequence over a span of approximately 90 seconds. Each one showed the structures from a slightly different angle as the probe continued along its trajectory. In the second image, I could see more detail, shadows that suggested depth, surfaces that might have been faceted or segmented. In the third, something that looked almost like, I don't know how to say this, like a seam. A place where 2 sections met. Not a crack, not damage, but a joint. Intentional. Designed. In the fourth image, the structures were starting to recede as the probe moved past them, and I could see their arrangement more clearly. They weren't random. They weren't scattered. They were positioned in a formation, a pattern, like pieces on a board game waiting for someone to make the next move. Then I opened the final image. It was captured milliseconds before the data stream was severed. Something in the probe's transmission system had cut out abruptly without the usual error codes or warning signals. Just silence. And this image was the last thing it sent before that silence began. At first, I didn't see what was different. The structures were still there, still massive, still impossible. But something had changed. One of the shapes near the edge of the frame had moved or rotated or shifted in some way that I couldn't quite identify. The angle was different than it had been in the previous image, and in the corner of the frame, almost at the edge of what the optical array could capture, there was something else, something that wasn't part of the structures, something smaller, different geometry, different proportions, and it was positioned in a way that made my stomach drop. I can't prove what I'm about to say. I know how it sounds. I know that you're probably already thinking of explanations, lens artifacts, image compression errors, pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns and faces in random noise. I've thought of all of those things. I've spent 8 years thinking of all of those things. But I'm telling you what I saw and what I felt when I saw it, and the feeling was unmistakable. That shape in the corner of the frame, whatever it was facing the probe. Not just positioned near it, facing it. Oriented toward it in a way that suggested awareness. Attention, the same way you might turn your head when you hear a sound behind you, the same way you might look up when you sense someone watching you from across a room. It was looking back. I know that sounds insane. I know there's no way to confirm it from a single image, from a shape that was barely more than a smudge at the edge of the frame. But I felt it. The same primal recognition that tells you when you're not alone in a dark house, when someone is standing behind you before you turn around. When eyes are on you, even though you can't see them, it wasn't evidence. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that bypasses your rational mind entirely and goes straight to something older, something deeper, something that evolved long before we had words for what we were afraid of. That thing, whatever it was, knew the probe was there. And in that final millisecond before the transmission cut out, it had turned to look. I don't know how long I sat there after that. Time stopped working the way it was supposed to. I remember the glow of the monitor, the hum of the servers, the sound of my own breathing in the empty basement. I remember my hands shaking. I remember feeling cold, the kind of cold that comes from inside that has nothing to do with temperature. I remember thinking that I should do something, close the images, report what I had seen, call someone, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed. Like a rabbit that has just seen the shadow of a hawk pass overhead. Like something very small that has just realized how big the world actually is. When I finally looked at the clock in the corner of my screen, 31 minutes had passed. It felt like 30 seconds. It felt like 30 years. The cache purged 16 minutes later. I watched it happen. A progress bar appeared at the bottom of the screen, the system syncing with the primary server. Erasing the glitch that had let me see what I was never supposed to see. The thumbnails vanished one by one. The image files disappeared from my local drive. And when it was done, there was nothing left. No evidence. No proof. Just empty folders and a log entry that would be buried in 1,000 other routine operations. I sat there in the dark, staring at the space where the images had been, and I realized that I was the only person who had seen them, the only person who knew, and I had no way to prove any of it. The images were gone, the probe was silent, and I was alone with something I couldn't unsee, couldn't explain, couldn't tell anyone about. That was the moment I understood that my life had just split in two, before and after, and there was no going back. I drove home at 2 a.m. The streets were empty, that strange post-midnight emptiness where traffic lights still cycle through their colors, even though no one is there to see them. I don't remember much about the drive. I don't remember what was on the radio, or if the radio was even on. I remember pulling into my apartment complex and sitting in the car for a long time, engine off, hands still on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, that sodium orange glow that makes everything look sickly and unreal. I kept thinking I should go inside. I kept thinking I should do something, but I couldn't make my body move. I sat there for 20 minutes, maybe longer, before I finally got out of the car and walked to my apartment like a man walking through water. Sarah was asleep when I got home, or pretending to be asleep. I couldn't tell anymore, and I didn't want to find out. I sat on the couch in the dark living room and watched the shadows change on the ceiling as cars passed on the street outside. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I wasn't tired. I was exhausted, more tired than I had ever been in my life. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shapes, those structures. That thing in the corner of the final frame turned toward the probe, turned toward me. My brain wouldn't let go of it. It kept replaying the images over and over, trying to find an explanation that made sense, that fit into the world I thought I understood. It never found one. By the time the sun came up, I felt like I had aged 10 years. I didn't report what I saw. I need you to understand that. I didn't save the files. I didn't take screenshots. I didn't tell my supervisor, or my colleagues, or my wife, or anyone. I went to work the next day and did my job and acted like nothing had happened. And when people ask me why, when they want to know how I could have seen something like that and just stayed quiet, the honest answer is that I don't entirely know. The explanation isn't clean. It isn't heroic. It's messy and human and not something I'm proud of. But it's the truth, and I've spent 8 years lying by omission, so I might as well tell the truth about this part, at least. Fear was part of it. Of course, fear was part of it. I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see, something that someone had gone to considerable effort to hide. And I wasn't stupid enough to think there wouldn't be consequences for knowing, but it wasn't just fear. There was also disbelief. A part of me, a larger part than I want to admit, kept insisting that I must have misunderstood, that I was tired, stressed, emotionally compromised, and my brain had played a trick on me, that there was a rational explanation I was too exhausted to see, some optical phenomenon or camera artifact that would be obvious to anyone who looked at it with fresh eyes. I wanted that to be true. I wanted so badly for there to be a normal explanation that I almost convinced myself there was one. And beneath that, beneath the fear and the disbelief, there was something else, something harder to admit. I had worked in that system long enough to understand how it dealt with problems. Not dramatically, not violently, just quietly. A contract not renewed, a clearance downgraded, a reference that suddenly became vague and unhelpful. People didn't get threatened. They got managed. They got moved. They got forgotten. And I had seen enough people disappear from projects, from teams, from the industry entirely, to know that the ones who caused trouble were the ones who stopped existing. Not in any way you could point to, just slowly, gradually, until one day you realized you hadn't seen them in months and no one could remember exactly why. So I stayed silent. I told myself I was being smart, cautious, that I needed time to think, to figure out what to do. But really, I was just scared. Scared of what I had seen, and scared of what would happen if I admitted I had seen it. I went to work. I processed data. I attended meetings and nodded at the right moments, and acted like I was still the same person I had been before that Thursday night. But I wasn't. Something had changed inside me. Something had broken, or woken up, or both. And every day I felt the weight of what I knew pressing down on me, getting heavier, demanding to be acknowledged. I ignored it. I buried it. I pretended it wasn't there. That was my first real choice after seeing those images, and I chose cowardice. I've had to live with that ever since. The mission evaporated within 2 weeks. That's the only word for it. One day it was there, active, ongoing, with scheduled data transmissions and analysis timelines and all the bureaucratic infrastructure that keeps a deep space project alive. The next day, it was gone. The probe status was updated to signal loss, cause undetermined. No investigation, no review board, no attempt to reestablish contact or diagnose what had gone wrong. Just a single status change in the database, and then the project was archived, moved to a server somewhere that no one would ever look at again. My team was reassigned to other data streams. We had a brief meeting where our supervisor thanked us for our work and said the project had been discontinued due to technical issues. No one asked questions. No one seemed surprised. It was like the whole thing had never happened. Elena stopped showing up a week after that. She was the only other person on my team who had been working that specific data batch the night the images came through. I don't know if she saw anything. I don't know if the synchronization error affected her workstation too, or if she noticed the flagged files, or if she had any idea what had been removed from the queue before it reached us. I never asked. I was too scared to ask. One Monday she just wasn't there, and when I asked our supervisor about it, he said she had taken medical leave. Personal reasons. He didn't know when she'd be back. She never came back. I tried to find her a few months later, looked her up online, checked professional networks, asked around quietly. Nothing. It was like she had evaporated too. I still don't know where she is. I try not to think about what that means. That's when I started noticing things. Small things, the kind of things you dismiss at first because they could be coincidences. A car parked across from my apartment building, a silver sedan, always in the same spot, always empty. It was there when I left for work in the morning. It was there when I came home at night. I told myself it belonged to someone in the building, a new resident I hadn't met. But the plates were different every few days. Same car, different plates. And sometimes, when I walked past it, I had the strangest feeling that someone was watching me from inside, even though the windows were tinted too dark to see through. Paranoia, probably. That's what I told myself. You're being paranoid. You're seeing patterns that aren't there. Then there were the phone calls. My phone would ring, I would answer, and there would be nothing. Not a dial tone, not static, not a telemarketer fumbling with their script. Just silence. The kind of silence that has a presence to it, that feels like someone is there, listening, waiting. It happened 2, 3 times a week, always from different numbers. Always the same empty silence on the other end. I started checking my email obsessively, and I noticed that messages seemed to be delayed. I would send something, and the recipient would get it hours later, even though my sent folder showed it had gone out immediately. I would receive emails that were time-stamped from the morning, but didn't appear in my inbox until evening, like something was reading them first, screening them, looking for something. I know how this sounds. I know that paranoia is a symptom, not an insight. I know that stressed, sleep-deprived people see threats everywhere, that the human brain is wired to find patterns even when there aren't any, that confirmation bias can turn random coincidences into vast conspiracies if you let it. I've told myself all of that. I've spent years telling myself all of that. But here's the thing about paranoia. Sometimes the thing you're afraid of is real. Sometimes the patterns you see are actually there. And I can't shake the feeling that in those weeks and months after I saw those images, someone was watching me, waiting to see what I would do, whether I would talk, whether I needed to be managed the way Elena had been managed. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe my mind was breaking under the weight of what I knew. I don't know anymore. I'm not sure I ever will. I want to tell you about what didn't happen. That's important, because when people hear stories like this, they imagine men in black suits showing up at your door. They imagine being followed by unmarked vans, receiving threatening phone calls, waking up to find their house ransacked or their brakes cut, or some other dramatic thing that happens in movies. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. What happened to me was quieter than that, subtler. In some ways, it was worse because there was nothing I could point to, nothing I could fight, nothing I could prove was connected to anything else. It was just a slow, steady erosion of everything I had built, so gradual that by the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop it. My contract came up for renewal 6 months after that night in the basement. I had been through the process 4 times before, and it had always been routine. A few forms, a meeting with HR, a signature done. My performance reviews were good. My supervisors had always been satisfied with my work. There was no reason to expect anything different this time, but when I sat down for the renewal meeting, I could tell immediately that something had changed. The HR rep wouldn't quite meet my eyes. She kept shuffling papers, apologizing for the delay, explaining that there had been some unexpected budget adjustments and they were having to make difficult decisions across several programs. My contract would not be renewed. The reason given was budget reallocation. Nothing personal. Just the way things worked out. I asked questions, of course. I asked which programs were being cut. I asked if there were other positions available, if I could transfer to a different team, if there was anything I could do to stay on. The HR rep gave me the same vague, apologetic answers over and over. Budget constraints. Difficult decisions. Nothing she could do. She thanked me for my years of service and told me I would receive excellent references for future employment opportunities. She was lying. I didn't know that yet, but I would find out soon enough. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, I walked back to my desk, packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box, and carried them to my car. No one said goodbye. No one even looked up. It was like I was already gone. The security clearance came next. A week after my contract ended, I received a notice that my clearance was being placed under administrative review. The letter didn't explain what that meant or what had triggered the review. It didn't give a timeline for completion or a process for appeal. It just informed me that until the review was complete, my clearance status was suspended. I called the number on the letter. I was transferred to 3 different departments. No one could tell me anything. The review would be completed when it was completed. I should wait for further communication. That communication never came. Months passed. Years. My clearance was never formally revoked, but it was never reinstated either. It just sat there, suspended, indefinitely. A door that wasn't closed but would never open again. I started applying for other jobs in the aerospace industry. That was what I knew. That was what I was trained for. I had 6 years of experience at a NASA-affiliated facility, good performance reviews, specialized technical skills. There should have been opportunities, but something strange started happening. I would apply for positions I was clearly qualified for, and I would never hear back. Or I would get to the interview stage, and the interviewer would seem enthusiastic, and then the company would go silent. Or I would be told that they had decided to go in a different direction without any explanation of what direction that was. It happened over and over. Positions I should have gotten, interviews that should have led somewhere, all of them evaporating into nothing. Eventually, I started asking for references directly from my former supervisors at JPL, people who had praised my work for years, who had written glowing evaluations, who had told me I was one of the most reliable technicians they had ever worked with. And what I got back was nothing. Vague language. Non-committal phrases. I believe he worked here for several years. I don't recall the specific details of his contributions. I'm not in a position to provide a detailed recommendation at this time. These were people who had known me, trusted me, worked alongside me for years. Now they spoke like they barely remembered my name. Like I was a stranger they had passed in a hallway once and couldn't quite place. It was the most disorienting feeling I have ever experienced, being erased by people who had known you. That's what it felt like, being erased. Not violently, not dramatically, just slowly, gradually, one piece at a time, like someone was going through the record of my life and carefully removing every trace of who I had been and what I had done. My clearance suspended. My contract terminated. My references silent, my applications ignored. There was no confrontation, no accusation, no moment where someone looked me in the eye and told me I was being punished for what I had seen. There was just absence, doors that had been open quietly closing, opportunities that should have existed ceasing to exist. I felt like I was fading out of my own life, like a photograph left in the sun too long, the image growing lighter and lighter until eventually there would be nothing left but blank paper. I left the aerospace industry within 2 years, not because I wanted to, but because there was nowhere left for me to go. Every door I tried was locked. Every contact I reached out to was suddenly unavailable. It was like a coordinated campaign, except there was no coordination I could see, no orders I could trace, no conspiracy I could expose. It was just the system doing what systems do when they decide someone doesn't belong anymore, pushing them out, making space, ensuring they can never get close enough to cause problems again. I don't know who made the decision. I don't know if there was a memo, a meeting, a conversation. I just know that one day I was a trusted contractor with a future, and 2 years later I was no one, starting over from nothing, trying to build a new life out of the wreckage of the old one. I moved to a different state. Then I moved again. I got a job doing something completely unrelated to anything I had done before. I'm not going to tell you what it is or where I live now. You'll understand why. I don't stay in touch with anyone from my old life. Not my former colleagues, not my supervisors, not the people I spent 6 years working alongside in that basement. I don't know which of them knew what happened to me and which of them were just following orders and which of them were completely in the dark. I don't know who I could trust. And after what happened with my references, after seeing how quickly people who had known me could pretend they didn't, I'm not willing to find out. Sarah and I divorced about a year after I left the industry. That had been coming for a long time, but I think what happened accelerated it. I couldn't tell her what I had seen. I couldn't explain why I was so afraid, why I jumped at shadows, why I spent hours staring at nothing and couldn't sleep through the night. She thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. Maybe seeing something that contradicts everything you believe about the universe is a kind of breakdown by definition. Either way, she couldn't live with the person I had become, and I couldn't blame her. We sold the apartment. We split what little we had. She moved to Seattle. I haven't spoken to her in 7 years. I hope she's happy. I hope she's found someone who doesn't carry the kind of weight I carry. She deserves that. I think about the efficiency of it sometimes. How clean it was. How quiet. No men in black suits. No threats. No dramatic confrontations that would have given me something to fight against, something to point to as evidence that I was being persecuted. Just a slow, administrative dismantling of everything I had built. A contract not renewed. A clearance suspended. References that dried up. Opportunities that disappeared. And at the end of it, a man who saw something he shouldn't have, pushed so far out of the system that he could never get close to anything important again. That's how you silence someone in the modern world. You don't threaten them. You don't make them a martyr. You just quietly ensure that they can never be a problem. It's elegant in a terrible way, and it works. It worked on me. I've told you what happened. The images, the silence, the slow erosion of my career, my marriage, my life. But I haven't told you the hardest part. I haven't told you what it did to me. Not externally, not the things that happened to my job and my relationships and my place in the world. I mean internally. What it did to the inside of my head, to the way I understand reality, to the fundamental assumptions I had built my entire worldview on top of. That's harder to talk about. It's harder because I don't have the vocabulary for it. It's harder because every time I try to put it into words, the words come out sounding either crazy or trite, and neither of those captures what I actually mean. But I'll try. I owe you that much, after everything else I've told you. I grew up believing in a comprehensible universe, not a kind universe, not a fair universe, just a universe that made sense. A universe governed by physics, by laws we could discover and describe and predict. Even the vastness of space, even the billions of light years of emptiness between galaxies, even the mind-breaking scale of it all, that was okay because it was still understandable. Cold, indifferent, mechanical, but rational. The universe didn't care about us, but at least we could understand why it didn't care. At least we could map its indifference, quantify it, write equations that described how matter and energy behaved across unimaginable distances. That was the deal I had made with reality. It would be meaningless, but it would be comprehensible. I could live with that. The images broke that deal. I don't know how else to say it. Whatever I saw out there, those structures, those shapes, that thing in the corner of the final frame, it wasn't supposed to exist. Not according to any framework I had for understanding the universe. If those structures were natural, they violated every principle of physics I had ever learned. And if they weren't natural, if they were built, then someone built them. Something built them. Something with intention, something with purpose. Something that looked at the void between stars and decided to make something there. That possibility, the possibility of intention, of design, of a universe that wasn't just random particles bouncing off each other in an endless accident, that terrified me more than anything else. Because if something built those structures, then the universe isn't what I thought it was. It's not empty. It's not indifferent. It's not a vast machine running on autopilot until the heat death of everything. There's something out there, maybe many somethings. And they're not just existing, they're acting, building, creating, watching. That last part is what keeps me awake at night. The thing in the final image, the shape that was facing the probe, that knew we were there. Something somewhere is aware of us, has been aware of us, maybe for longer than we've been aware of ourselves. And I have no idea what it wants. I have no idea if it thinks about us at all, if we matter to it, if we're anything more than an interesting anomaly or a potential threat or something too small to even notice. I grew up in a religious household. I've mentioned that. Quiet Midwestern Christianity, the kind where you went to church on Sundays and said grace before meals and didn't talk much about God the rest of the week. It was more cultural than spiritual, more habit than belief. By the time I left for college, I had already stopped believing in any meaningful way. Not dramatically, not with any crisis of faith, just a gradual fading. The prayers started feeling like talking to no one. The rituals started feeling like going through motions. I drifted away from it the way you drift away from anything that stops mattering. And by my 30s, I would have called myself an atheist without hesitation. The universe was physics. Death was the end. There was no one watching, no plan, no purpose. Just matter and energy and time. I can't call myself that anymore. Not honestly. I don't know what I believe now, but I know what I don't believe. I don't believe the universe is empty. I don't believe we're alone. I don't believe that what I saw can be explained by any framework that doesn't include something like intention, something like design, something like awareness. Whether you call that God or aliens or something else entirely, I don't know. I'm not sure the categories matter. What matters is that the comfortable atheism I had settled into, the confident certainty that the universe was a vast machine with no one at the controls, that's gone, shattered. I can't put it back together no matter how hard I try. And what's left in its place is something I don't have a name for, a kind of terrified uncertainty. A not knowing that feels heavier than any belief I ever held. The loneliest part is that I can't share this with anyone. Not really. I've tried, a few times, with people I thought might understand. I've tried to explain what I saw, what it meant, what it did to me, and I can see their eyes glaze over, or fill with concern, or narrow with skepticism. They hear structures in deep space, and they think I'm talking about a movie. They hear something was watching, and they think I've lost my mind. And maybe I have. Maybe that's the simplest explanation. But even if I'm crazy, even if everything I saw was a hallucination brought on by stress and sleep deprivation and a failing marriage, the experience was real. The weight of it is real. I carry it every day, and there's no one I can set it down with. No one who can help me hold it. No one who understands what it's like to know something you can't prove and can't forget. I started praying again about 3 years ago. I don't know why I'm telling you that. It feels like an admission of weakness, or maybe an admission of desperation. I don't pray to Jesus or Allah or any God with a name and a book and a list of rules. I don't pray expecting an answer. I just, sometimes, Late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself speaking out loud to no one, to the darkness, to whatever might be listening. I don't ask for anything. I don't thank anyone for anything. I just talk. I say what I'm feeling. I describe what I'm afraid of. I admit that I don't understand and probably never will. It's not faith, not in any traditional sense. It's more like, I don't know, reaching out a hand in the dark and hoping something will take it. Maybe that's what faith always was. Maybe the people who built cathedrals and wrote scriptures and knelt in prayer for thousands of years, maybe they were doing the same thing I'm doing now, reaching into the unknown, hoping for contact, trying to believe that the universe isn't as empty as it looks. I used to think they were naive, those believers. I used to think they were afraid of the truth, hiding from the cold reality of a godless cosmos. Now I'm not so sure. Now I think maybe they knew something I didn't. Not the specific details, not the doctrines and dogmas that religions fight over, but the basic intuition that something is out there, that we're not alone, that the darkness is full of things we can't see and might never understand. Maybe faith was never about certainty. Maybe it was always about exactly this, living with the not knowing. I don't know if what I saw was divine or alien or something beyond both categories. I don't know if the distinction even matters. What I know is that the universe is bigger and stranger and more full of intention than I ever imagined. What I know is that something out there is aware of us, even if we're barely aware of it. What I know is that I am a very small thing in a very large story, and I have no idea what role I'm supposed to play or whether I even have a role at all. That knowledge doesn't comfort me. It doesn't inspire me. It just sits there, heavy and permanent, like a stone in my chest that I can't cough up or swallow. I carry it everywhere I go. I will carry it until I die. And I still don't know what any of it means. Sometimes people ask me if I regret looking at those images. If I wish I had just closed the window and walked away and let the cache purge without ever knowing what was in those files. It's a fair question. My life would have been easier. My career would have continued. My marriage might have survived. I could have stayed in that comfortable atheism, that comprehensible universe, that rational framework where everything made sense and nothing was watching, but I didn't, and I can't go back. And when I'm honest with myself, really honest, I don't think I would want to, because whatever those images cost me, they also gave me something. The knowledge that we're not alone, the certainty that the universe is stranger and more meaningful than I ever dared to believe. Maybe that's a burden. Maybe it's a gift. After 8 years, I still can't tell the difference. I don't have a satisfying ending for you. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you that I found proof, that I gathered evidence, that I blew the whistle and exposed everything, and now the whole world knows what I know. That would be a good story. That would be the kind of story where the hero suffers but triumphs, where truth wins out in the end, where keeping secrets has consequences for the people who kept them. But that's not what happened. That's not my story. My story is that I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, and then I spent the next 8 years learning how to live with having seen it. No triumph, no vindication, no justice. Just a man and a memory and a weight that never gets lighter no matter how many years pass. I didn't expose the truth. I didn't become a hero. I didn't even try. I stayed quiet. I let them push me out of my career. I let my marriage fall apart. I moved across the country and started over and never told anyone what I knew. I was a coward. I've made peace with that, more or less. I did what I thought I needed to do to survive, and survival isn't heroic. It's just survival. The people who tell these kinds of stories, the real whistleblowers, the ones who risk everything to get the truth out, they're braver than I ever was. I don't know if I admire them or pity them. Maybe both. Maybe it takes a kind of madness to sacrifice everything for a truth that most people don't want to hear anyway. So why am I speaking now? Why, after 8 years of silence, am I sitting here telling you all of this? I don't have a good answer. Maybe enough time has passed that they've stopped watching me. Maybe whatever system flagged me as a potential problem has moved on to other concerns, other threats, other people who know things they shouldn't. Maybe I'm old enough now, tired enough now, that I've just stopped caring what happens. The fear that kept me quiet for so long, it hasn't gone away exactly, but it's changed. It's become more like background noise, something I've learned to live with, like tinnitus or a bad knee. You stop noticing it after a while. You stop letting it control you. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe I just got tired of the silence. The weight of carrying this alone, year after year, with no one to share it with, no one who would understand, no one who would believe me even if I told them. That weight has a cumulative effect. It builds up. And eventually, the pressure of keeping it inside becomes greater than the pressure of letting it out. I think that's what happened. I think I reached some kind of breaking point, some threshold where the risk of speaking finally became smaller than the cost of staying silent. I don't know if that makes me brave or just exhausted. Probably the second one. Bravery implies a choice. This feels more like giving in. I'm not asking you to believe me. I know how this sounds. I know that everything I've told you could be explained away as the delusions of a stressed, sleep-deprived man who is going through a divorce and watching his father's mind deteriorate. I know that there's no evidence, no proof, nothing I can show you that would hold up to scrutiny. The images are gone. The mission was erased. The people who might have corroborated my story have either disappeared or learned to stay quiet. All I have is my word, and my word isn't worth much. Not to you, not to anyone. I understand that. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm just trying to tell you what I saw and what it did to me. What you do with that is up to you. But I want to ask you a question. It's the question I've been asking myself for 8 years, and I still don't have a good answer. If there were something out there, something vast, something ancient, something that had been watching us long before we knew we were being watched, would you want to know? Really, no. Not as a theory or a possibility or a fun thing to speculate about, but as a certainty, a fact, a weight you would carry for the rest of your life? Or would you prefer the comfort of an empty sky, the peace of a universe that makes sense, that follows rules, that doesn't have anything hiding in the darkness? Between stars? I used to think I would want to know. I used to think truth was always better than ignorance. Now I'm not so sure. Now I understand why some doors stay closed. I think about the people who remove those images, the ones who flagged them for deletion before anyone at my level could see them, the ones who archived the mission and reassigned my team and quietly ensured I would never work in the industry again. I used to hate them. I used to lie awake at night imagining who they were, what they looked like, what gave them the right to decide what the rest of us got to know. But I don't hate them anymore. I'm not even sure they were wrong. Maybe humanity isn't ready for what's out there. Maybe we're too fragile, too divided, too caught up in our own small conflicts to handle the knowledge that we're not alone. We're a species that still fights wars over borders and oil and whose God is the right God. What would we do if we knew something was watching? Maybe the people who keep these secrets are protecting us. Maybe they've looked at the evidence and decided that the truth would break us, would shatter the fragile frameworks we've built to make sense of our lives, would plunge the world into chaos or despair or something worse. Maybe they're the ones who have to carry the weight so the rest of us don't have to. I can almost understand that. I can almost respect it. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Who gave them the right to decide? Who elected them to be the gatekeepers of truth? Who determined that they were qualified to judge what humanity can and cannot handle? I don't remember voting for that. I don't remember anyone asking my opinion. They just decided. And I wonder how many other things they've decided we're not ready to know. I wonder what else is out there. What other images have been deleted? What other missions have been quietly archived? What other people like me have seen things they weren't supposed to see and been pushed out of the system before they could tell anyone? I wonder if there's a whole shadow history of contact, of encounters, of evidence that's been systematically erased by people who think they know better. I wonder if the truth is so much stranger than what I saw that my experience is just a footnote, a minor incident in a much larger story that's been kept from all of us. I wonder, and I have no way to find out, and that uncertainty is almost worse than knowing. Almost. Here's what I do know. The universe is not empty. Whatever I believed before that night, whatever comfortable assumptions I had made about the nature of reality, they're gone now. There are structures in the darkness between stars. There are shapes that don't belong to any phenomenon we've named or categorized. There is something out there that knows we exist, that watched our probe pass by, that may be watching still. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it thinks about us at all, or if we're too small and too brief to merit its attention. But it's there. It's real. And no amount of denial or deletion or bureaucratic erasure can change that. The universe is not empty. I know that now. I will know it until the day I die. And now, so do you. Whether that knowledge is a gift or a curse, I can't tell you. I've spent 8 years trying to figure it out, and I still don't have an answer. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe some truths just exist, without being good or bad, helpful or harmful. They just are, and you have to find a way to live with them. That's what I've been doing, finding a way to live. Some days it's harder than others. Some nights I still can't sleep, still see those shapes when I close my eyes, still feel the weight of what I know pressing down on my chest like a stone. But I'm still here, still breathing, still carrying it. And now I'm not carrying it alone anymore. You've heard what I have to say. You know what I know. What you do with that is your choice. But whatever you decide, remember this. The sky isn't empty. It never was. And somewhere out there, in the darkness between worlds, something is watching. It was watching before we were born. It will be watching long after we're gone. And the only question that matters is whether we're brave enough to look back.